All right, hello everyone. We're just gonna wait just a second for everybody to get connected, and then we will go ahead and get started with our event in just a moment. All right, hello and welcome for everybody joining in. Looks like we still have some people connecting, but we'll just give it a few seconds and then we'll go ahead and get started with our event. Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll just go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. So my name is Carrie Moore, and I'm the Academic Program Manager for the Center for Latin American Studies, or CLASS, at the University of Utah. Today, we're very excited to welcome you to today's event, Languages and Identities, that will explore some differences and connections between Nahuatl and Ute, which testifies to a link between the native peoples of what is now southern United States and those in Mexico. This event is being presented by the Center for Latin American Studies at the University of Utah and the Consulate of Mexico in Salt Lake City. To give a brief introduction to our work, the Center for Latin American Studies is a Title VI National Resource Center and serves as a hub for a variety of Latin American related activities at the U, involving teaching, research, and community outreach. CLASS provides faculty with resources and intellectual environment to realize cutting-edge research and works with campus and community partners, such as the Consulate, to develop exceptional educational opportunities, courses, public events, study abroad, and internship programs for students. A particular priority for the center is the research and growth of less commonly taught and indigenous languages throughout the country. To that end, we work closely with a variety of universities and partnerships nationally and internationally, and are particularly proud of the intensive Nahuatl language and culture program held each summer with the Institute of Teaching and Ethnological Research of Zacatecas, based in Zacatecas, Mexico. Many of our students from this program are here today, as well as our instructors, to whom we would like to give a thank you for all they do to help us in achieving this mission. We simply couldn't do it without them. Before we begin, we also want to formally acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. Although we are gathering virtually from a variety of places, we are grateful for the territory upon which the U is established. We respect Utah's indigenous peoples, who are the original stewards of this land, as well as a sovereign relationship between the tribes, states, and federal government. And we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with the Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. So today, as I said, we're very happy to bring you this special event in partnership with the Consulate of Mexico in Salt Lake City. We're honored to have Consul Jose Borjon here today to open this event as well. Consul Borjon, thank you for joining us, and I will now turn the time over to you for your opening remarks and to introduce our speakers today.
Great, thank you, Carrie, and thank you all at the Center for Latin American Studies at the University of Utah. Muchas gracias, buenas tardes a todos y todas por esta to us, it's very important and relevant that we have the opportunity to share our history, our culture, and at the same time explore those bridges between Mexico and this area. And we were very motivated with the opportunity to partner with the Center for Latin American Study, who helped us identify two wonderful specialists that will talk with something that is always, at least for me, very interesting, new, and it's the linguistic family and how we can find certain bridges and limitations on the Nahuatl and Ute linguistic family. And we think it's very important and very present day and current relevant, because really, as Carrie was saying, this land had people living here even before the arrival of the Mormon pioneers. And this land also was before Mexico. So who were those who were here? What were the culture? What was the language? What unites us? That is something that we want to invite people to discuss, to learn, as well as us. And that is why today we have two wonderful speakers. Let me introduce them to you. We have Mr. Dirk Elzinga, who is an associate professor in the linguistic department at Brigham Young University here in Provo. He received his PhD from the University of Arizona in 1999, and his research interests include the documentation and description of the Uto-Aztecan languages of the Great Basin and adjoining areas, with an emphasis on the phonetics and phonology. He has worked on language projects with the Gashut, Western Shoshone, Chemehuevi, and Ute communities. He is currently with the Language Conservancy in cooperation with the Ute Mountain Ute tribe on a dictionary of Ute Mountain tribe. Also joining us is Abelardo de la Cruz. He's a Nahuatl native speaker from Teposteco, Chicontepec in the north of Veracruz, and currently he's a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Albany, SUNY, and is an associate instructor at the Instituto de Docencias de Investigación Etnológicas de Zacatecas. He obtained his master's degree in humanistic and educational research and a bachelor's degree in law from the Autonomous University of Zacatecas. On this academic year, he serves as a Nahuatl instructor in the Department of World Languages and Culture at the University of Utah, where he teaches for the Salt Lake Community College, the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of California, Merced. He also serves as a collaborator in the project titled Passion Plays of 18th Century Mexico, sponsored by the National Endowment for Humanities. Mr. de la Cruz is a co-author of the book Citlalmachiyotl, A Colonial Dream of the Three Kings, and published a book chapter titled The Value of Customer Christianity in the Discourse of Nahuatl Catechists from the Huasteca region, and recently published a book chapter titled La Historia de Chicomezochitl y Tenantzitl de Jesús Bautista, Elementos Paralelos a los Cuentos Populares Europeos. His field of interest include the teaching of Nahuatl as a second language, the folk tales, and the Nahuatl religion led by catechists and prayer specialist Nosa Motosiwari from the northern Veracruz. We appreciate very much both of you joining. Muchas gracias a ambos por acompañarnos en esta charla. Carrie, I think we are really looking forward for their presentations. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Consul. So thank you for joining us today again. And of course, it's always a pleasure to work with Consulate. So we'll first hear from Dr. Dirk Elzinga. After hearing from both of our speakers, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. So if you have questions, we ask that our audience go ahead and enter those in the chat. Your questions can be in either English or Spanish. And we will do our very best to get to as many of those as we possibly can at the end of their presentations. And without further ado, I will turn the time over to Dr. Elzinga.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. I have some slides that I would like to show you to make this a little easier. There, that's what I want. All right, can you all see the opening slide there? Okay, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. I am I'm always happy to talk about my research in Uto-Aztecan languages and Uto-Aztecan linguists. Before I start, I want to uh, thank the interpreters for their hard work. This is going to be hard work. I think there are a lot of specialized terms. There's a lot of jargon vocabulary in linguistics that isn't common to many fields, and I appreciate their efforts in making sure that you can all understand me. So what I would like to do today, my main goal is to provide you with a short introduction to Uto-Aztecan linguistics, with an eye towards thinking about Uto-Aztecan as a language family and what that might mean, to think of languages as belonging to a family. So this is the geographical distribution of Uto-Aztecan languages. So I hope you can see that okay. Right now, I suspect most of you are looking to see where you live and if you live on Uto-Aztecan land. I was born and raised in Salt Lake City, which is Uto-Aztecan country. The Salt Lake Valley formed it was kind of a border zone between the Shoshones, Goshutes, and the Utes. I now live and work in Utah Valley at Brigham Young University, which is also sort of in the same sort of border area, although more squarely associated with the Utes. I did my graduate work, as mentioned, at the University of Arizona in Tucson, which is also in Uto-Aztecan country, this time the Tohono O'odham Nation. So I have spent my whole life living and working in Uto-Aztecan country. So these languages are important to me because of this. And I feel, and part of the reason that I do what I do is I feel a certain responsibility to these people and the languages that they speak, to help them in whatever way they desire and whatever way I can to promote and preserve their indigenous language as part of their indigenous lifestyles. All right, so let's first ask the question, what does it mean for languages to be part of a family? Why would we want to group these languages together? And this is mostly what I want to talk to you about today. So we'll start by looking at some basic vocabulary items in 8 languages of the Uto-Aztecan language family. Now, there are probably some symbols here that you may not be familiar with. That's okay. If you just look at those symbols and think of them as maybe the closest, and think of the closest symbol that you recognize, I think we'll get along just fine. So we're looking at basic vocabulary because we are interested in kind of the oldest parts of language. We want to see what is unique and indigenous to the language itself before all the borrowings and before language contact may have come in to make things more complicated. So in this set of data, there's a lot of grammatical endings, so let's get rid of those. We want to focus our attention just on the roots. So if you look at these words for a while, you'll notice that many of them look very similar to each other. Okay, so let you take a look, scan through some of the rows and columns and see what we can find in the way of similarities. So words that are similar to each other because of common descent, we refer to in linguistics as cognates. So for cognates, we want to, so when linguists look for relationships among language, we look for cognates. We look for these words that probably came from a common source. So in this slide, I've grayed out words that are not cognate with others in their rows. And that helps us focus our attention on the words that are cognates. Now, let's look more carefully at the cognates that we see here. So what we want to do is identify patterns in sound among these cognates to see what that might tell us about what earlier stages of the languages may have looked like. So let's take a look at the very first item, the words for water in each of these different Uto-Aztecan languages. Now, 4 of the 7 begin with a P. So Ute, Tabatalaba, Luiseño, and Hopi. Tarahumara begins with a B, Cora begins with an H, and Nahuatl begins with a vowel. And so this is kind of an interesting set of correspondences. Let's see if we find something similar in other places. So if we go further down and look at the word for heavy, we can see something similar, that the word heavy in Ute begins with a P, and Tabatalaba, we don't have a cognate in Luiseño, but in Hopi also begins with a P. In Tarahumara begins with an H, or sorry, a B, and then Cora with an H, and then again in Nahuatl with a vowel. The next word down to look at is the word for road. And we see a similar pattern of consonant correspondence. And then finally, the word for breast and the word for eye will show similar patterns. So again, if you look at this table for a few minutes, you might notice some other patterns. So this is the first step that linguists undertake when they're trying to figure out how languages might be related to each other and what earlier stages of those languages may have looked like. So all of these patterns taken together tell us that these languages probably came from the same source. So we can see similar kinds of patterns when we look at Spanish and compare it with French and Italian, for example. And the similarities that they have all tell us that these languages came from the same source. And of course, we know that that source was Latin, and we have written records that confirm that to us, and we can see what earlier stages of the language look like, because the Latin speakers wrote quite a bit and left us with quite a few records. However, with Uto-Aztecan, we don't have evidence for this earlier stage in writing. So this means that we're going to have to do some reasoning about what an ancestor language to Uto-Aztecan languages might have looked like. So the way we do this is we take these observations that we make by looking at these words, these cognates, seeing how the correspondences work, and then we think about how they may have originated. Why, for example, with the word for water, why those four languages had a P, but the other languages have something a little bit different. So when we're comparing these sorts of relationships, or these sorts of correspondences together, we can then work backward towards an ancestral form of the language. So actually, let me come back to that in just a bit. So when we do this, we can set up these sound correspondences and then propose what the original sound may have been like. So here are these same four languages, but now we're just looking at the consonants and just at the vowels. In the rightmost column, we see some sounds written with a little star in front of it, and then the sounds themselves in red. They're just in red to draw your attention to them. The little star tells us that we are reconstructing or hypothesizing these as the sounds of the original language, or Proto-Uto-Aztecan, which I've abbreviated in the chart as PUA. And so what we notice in the very first line is that when a Ute word beginning with a P, or a Ute word that begins with a P, corresponds with the Tabatalaba, Luiseño, and Hopi words that begin with a P. But in Tohono O'odham, those words begin with a W. In Tarahumara begins with a B, in Cora begins with an H, and in Nahuatl, there is no consonant there. And as we saw in the earlier list, those words began with a vowel. Now, sometimes we will see P's in Nahuatl, and that's kind of a later development. So that's how to read this chart. So the sound that we find in each of these daughter languages, when we compare them all with each other, we can guess or hypothesize that the sounds in red were part of the original Proto-Uto-Aztecan language. The same thing is true for vowels. I haven't talked a lot about vowels. Vowels are a little bit simpler in Uto-Aztecan, and there isn't as much to say about their comparison, but you can see what I have here. So now we can put all of this together, and we come back to our first chart with these basic vocabulary items. And now what I've added is a column on the right that shows what the Proto-Uto-Aztecan word may have looked like and sounded like. And so what we see is that for the words for water, the Proto-Uto-Aztecan probably had a P at the beginning. And this is going to be true for the other words that begin with a P. So the word for heavy, the word for road, the word for one of the words for breast, and the word for eye as examples. Now, also in this little list of cognates, you'll notice that there's nose 1 and nose 2. That's because when we look across these different languages, we actually find 2 different words that we can trace back to Proto-Uto-Aztecan. And so we can reconstruct both of them. Now, we don't know yet why they had 2 words for nose. Maybe one was used metaphorically. Maybe one actually just meant something like tip. We don't know, but we can reconstruct both of those words, and we find that both of them, that descendants of both of these words, emerge in modern Uto-Aztecan languages as words for nose. And the same thing is true here for words for breast, or even words for feces. Not a really pleasant word, but it's a really good old word that's not likely to be borrowed from elsewhere. And so it's a good word to look at for comparative purposes. So when we do comparative linguistics, we're not just looking at the sounds, although this is very interesting and very useful to us to look at the sounds and then reconstruct words. We also need to know what the grammar was like. And so I want to talk about 3 grammatical phenomena that we find in Uto-Aztecan languages. Well, 3 if I have time, 2 definitely. So let's start first with pronouns. So here you see 2 tables, one including the pronouns from Ute and one including the pronouns from Nahuatl. Now, as you look through these tables and compare them with each other, say, okay, yeah, I see there's some similarities, but they look very different and they seem to be describing very different sorts of categories. So let's first concentrate on the kinds of things that they have in common. So first, there seems to be a major division in both Ute and in Nahuatl between what we might call independent pronouns, or pronouns that can stand by themselves as words, and then dependent pronouns, or pronouns that have to be attached to another word, such as a verb. So both languages have this same division. So this is a point of similarity between them. Now, when we look further in more detail at the chart, we see that in both languages, they distinguish at least a singular number from a plural number. So here's another point of similarity. A third point of similarity is that these pronouns will distinguish subject and object forms, but only in one case, either independent or dependent. So in Ute, the independent pronouns will distinguish subject and object. The dependent pronouns do not. In Nahuatl, we get a single set of independent pronouns, but in the dependent pronouns, we have 2 sets, one for subjects and one for objects. So there's some other things that are particular to Ute, such as the distinction. So we get a dual pronoun, which means there's just 2 of us. We also have a distinction between inclusive and exclusive first person. So this is as if to say, so if I'm talking to one of you and I say, let's go see a movie, I would use an inclusive pronoun because I'm referring to you and to me. But if I'm saying to you, yeah, we went to see a movie, and I'm not referring to you, but just to me and others, then I would use an exclusive pronoun. This distinction isn't available in Nahuatl, so I had to talk about it in different ways. But this is part of the grammatical set in pronouns in Ute. So we can work through the same comparative procedure that we did for the cognates that we saw earlier and come up with a set of pronouns that were probably available to Proto-Uto-Aztecan speakers. And what we have here, again, we have a dependent set and an independent set distinguishing singular and plural number. And in Proto-Uto-Aztecan, there was probably a distinction between third persons that refer to human beings and third persons that didn't refer to human beings. That distinction has gone all kinds of different directions in daughter languages. Something else that's very interesting that cinches the case for them being related to each other, I've highlighted now in red the sound correspondences among the pronouns. So if we look at the first person singular pronouns, the words for I and me, we see that they all have an N in them. If we look at the first person plural pronouns, we see that they all have a T in them. And then that the second person plural pronouns all have an M. This is a pattern that we find in many, many Uto-Aztecan languages, not just Ute and Nahuatl, but all over in the family. And so this similarity between languages Ute and Nahuatl are more evidence that these languages really do belong together in a language family. All right, the second grammatical thing, I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly. For many of the Uto-Aztecan languages, the stem of the verb will change according to the number of the subject. So if you look at the third language down, there's Ute again. So the verb sit, if you're talking about just one person sitting, you use one stem, kata. If you're talking about more than one person sitting, you use a completely different stem, yugui. So if you're talking about he is sitting, you use kata. If you're talking about they are sitting, use yugui. And many Uto-Aztecan languages do this. Ute, it's kind of dying out. Shoshone still has a pretty robust system. I only found one verb in Nahuatl that did this, so it's probably on its way out there as well, but it's there. And so this is another family resemblance that shows that Nahuatl and Ute, as well as these other languages here, belong to the same family. All right, finally, this one's my favorite grammatical thing. I really like thinking about absolutive suffixes. So if you're a student of Nahuatl or already a speaker, you're probably familiar with these noun endings. You know kind of when to put them on and when to take them off. Many Uto-Aztecan languages have something similar to this. So in languages like Shoshone and Ute, there are only very scattered traces of this. There are different suffixes now that have kind of taken on this responsibility in Ute. So what I've shown you here, so just, and let me back up and explain in case you're not familiar with this idea. So the absolutive suffix is a suffix that you attach to a noun stem to show that that noun is independent. It's not part of a possessive construction or a compound or anything like that. So the examples of their use in Nahuatl we see here. So we have the word for house with the li as this noun suffix. That suffix is dropped when you add the plural. When you want to say my house, the suffix is also dropped, and when you add the possessive pronoun. If you're saying on the house, then you add that locative suffix and the absolutive suffix disappears as well. We also see it in derivational context. So when you make a brand new word out of existing parts, so we have the word for homeowner, we see this suffix dropping off again. We also find this in compounds. So the word for hill has the TL version of the same suffix. When we compound it with the word for circle, the TL from the word hill drops off as part of that compound. So we're only using the stem. This is a particular and a peculiar Uto-Aztecan phenomenon. If we look at Ute, we see something similar going on with a slightly different range of suffixes. So the word for ear, for example, is nukav. When we possess it, nukan, and that v suffix drops off. Same thing with the other words here. Those suffixes drop off when they are possessed. When we find them in compounds, typically the suffix also disappears. So the absolutive suffix in Uto-Aztecan is one of the dead giveaways that you're dealing with the Uto-Aztecan language. Again, this family resemblance helps us clinch the deal that these languages belong together in a language family. So this representation is a representation of the Uto-Aztecan language family. So we see that we have some major divisions. So up in the north, we have Numic languages. Ute belongs to the Numic languages, as does Shoshone. We have Takic languages, which are spoken now in California, Tepiman, which include Aodam and Tepehuan, Taracahitic, Corachol, and then Aztecan, of course, which you are all most interested in here. The main division in Uto-Aztecan is between languages in the north and languages in the south. So Ute is a northern Uto-Aztecan language. Nahuatl is a southern Uto-Aztecan language. But because of all of the comparative work that generations of linguists have done for almost a century now, we know that Ute and Nahuatl definitely belong in the same language family. And this is a picture of that family. Now that we know all of this, what can we do with this information? We've reconstructed vocabulary, we've reconstructed some grammar. What can we do with this information? Well, one burning question that many linguists and anthropologists have is, where was Proto-Uto-Aztecan spoken? And we can use the information we've gained from our comparative study of Uto-Aztecan languages to help answer this question. So I want to focus right now for this last little bit on terms for plants and animals. So using these terms, there's some prerequisites. We have to be sure that we've accurately transcribed and reconstructed terms using sound linguistic methods. We need to be sure that we have a working family tree of the languages in question. We need to have some understanding of the cultural diversity and the interactions of speaker populations within the language family. Fourth, we need to have accurate information that identifies the plant and animal species, and that we can link those identifications to the native terms. And finally, we need to have some understanding or knowledge of the geographical distribution of the species in question and what environmental changes may have taken place. So here are some plant and animal terms that have been reconstructed for Proto-Uto-Aztecan. I've also included the Latin term where I knew it and had, and had time to add it, so you can see that we have identified many of these terms using accepted taxonomic practice. So the first 9 terms are found in 7 of the 9 Uto-Aztecan branches. So they're pretty widespread, both North and South Uto-Aztecan languages. The rest of the words, 10 through 27, are found in 6 of the 9 Uto-Aztecan branches. So again, we're on pretty solid ground. These words were probably part of Proto-Uto-Aztecan. So as we look at these words, what we're trying to find now is a place where they had pine trees, but also prickly pear, where there are certain kinds of grasses and cane or reeds, where they had certain kinds of animals that they would have encountered in their daily lives or even used for food or other purposes. And so when we put all of that together, what we find is that all of these species seem to exist in this area that I've enclosed in a dark circle. Now, this is just the same map that we started out with, and you can look to see there, it's a pretty wide range, but we're not really able to narrow it further down yet. But within this area, this is where Proto-Uto-Aztecan was spoken about 5,000 years ago. Now, this isn't by any means a consensus opinion. There are still many differences of opinion about where Proto-Uto-Aztecan may have been spoken, different kinds of considerations that I haven't gone through here. So it's still an open question, but this is one thing that the comparative study of Uto-Aztecan languages can do for us. It can shed light on earlier stages of the people who speak these languages, where they may have lived, and what they may have been encountered, what they may have encountered by the way of plants and animals for food. And if you think about the Nahuatl, the Aztec legend of Aztlan, this is also very suggestive, and a lot of people have, kind of thought about this question. So this may be a tie-in to folklore and mythology as well. The Hopis also have stories of a migration from another place, and so this story of migration, we may be looking at the ancestral homeland and the source of all these stories. So that's what I had prepared for you today. I appreciate your attention. As I said, I'm always happy to talk about Uto-Aztecan languages, and I'm looking forward to seeing what questions you have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Elzinga. And as a reminder to everybody in our audience, you can go ahead and enter Any questions that you have for Dr. Elzinga, as well as Abelardo de la Cruz, who will be speaking in just a moment in the chat. And those questions can be entered in either English or Spanish. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Abelardo de la Cruz, who will expound a little bit more on Nahuatl language and culture.
Thank you, Kari, and thank you to the organizers, people from my department here in the University of Utah and the Consulate here in Salt Lake City. And thank you to the Professor Elzinga. I want to continue the conversation, and now I want to talk about the Nahuatl, its people, and my current work related to my mother tongue. Well, I was born in this place in the north of Mexico. My municipality is named Chicontepec. In this place, there are more than 200 small towns. Basically, in that area is spoken Nahuatl. So the Spanish now is the first language spoken, and then is the Nahuatl, right? So basically, children, we grow up, we are bilingual because we learn Nahuatl at home, and basically when we are in the school, we learn Spanish. This is a landscape of my municipality. These places are located several small towns, and this mountain that you see here, this is a shrine, and all the Nahuatl people go to that Tippet to do rituals, to do several petitions to the deities, to our deities. I was born in that in this region, and in this region is practiced basically the agriculture. I want to talk a little bit about the writing system. Firstly, I want to mention that Nahuatl was a lingua franca spoken in Mexico before the conquest in 1521. And also Aztec people had contact with other cultural groups in the place known as Mesoamerica, like with Maya people or Tarascos people in Michoacán, as example. Nahuatl has around 28 dialects in Mexico and is spoken in 16 states, according to the INALI. So we have met several Nahuatl colleagues, several friends from different regions of Mexico. So when I began my studies about Nahuatl, I know now that Nahuatl is part of the Uto-Nahuatl linguistic family and is classified as an agglutinating language. So now I am in Salt Lake City, right? In this region, there are several cultural groups that speak, or we speak the same linguistic family. In the colonial times, Nahuatl was studied by friars, and they created dictionaries, books, chronicas. But now there are several libraries in multiple countries, multiple cities that conserve Nahuatl archives. Also in the colonial Mexico, Nahuatl was spoken and survived until the independence in 1821. So the Nahuatl survived all the colonial period in Mexico and was spoken a lot. Now people of today transmit the language orally. The language is spoken in the communities or pueblos in Mexico. That was a reason, in my case, how I learned Nahuatl, because my parents, my family are from a rural place, and there I learned Nahuatl that now I am teaching outside Mexico. So I want to talk about people here, Sisters de la Cruz. They are my family, and they taught me Nahuatl, and they speak Nahuatl. They doesn't speak Spanish. Here we have other family, Sir Cornelio and his wife. They use Nahuatl, right? And when I am in my small town, I am able to practice to talk in Nahuatl with them. Also, there are other families that are more bilingual, and they speak Spanish and they speak Nahuatl, right? In my case, I grew up speaking firstly Nahuatl, and then I learned Spanish. The impact of conquest. Nahuatl people maintained their identity. We express freely in Nahuatl Timasewalme. That is the expression that we use to demonstrate our identity. We also continue in these times in multiple deities. We believe in Atl, we believe in Tlali, we believe in Ehecatl, in Tlitl, Sintli, as some examples. Also, Nahuatl people do not forget the conquest, because we have this concept, Tlapohualistli, that are narrations and memories. And in that way, our family, our parents transmit the legacy of our ancestors and the idea of never to forget our legacy, right? Living in a small town is a good way to never forget like this idea of conquest, because in that places the Nahuatl is spoken a lot. So I think that's why Nahuatl people continue building, we continue developing our culture in natural places in Mexico. So Nahuatl people live today in different states of Mexico with a population around 2 million, right? And I think there are much more than 2 million of people, right? Many of these information is collected by the census in Mexico, right? One of the issues that we have is that in the census, we do not say that if I am an indigenous person or if I speak Nahuatl, right? I think we are more than 2 million. So in terms of identity, Nahuatl, as we are Masewalme. In terms of gender, so the division is for a man is Tlacatl and for a woman is Asihuatl. And we have also the names for a mestizo or for a white person. I think that was a concept that was created in the colonial time. We have the concept of coyote, that means a person, a man person who is from the city or who is a mestizo, or coyome in general. And we have the concept of shinola, that means a woman from a city, right? Both concepts were created in the colonial Mexico. So Nahua people live in a Pilaltepetzi, that means the small town or community. That Pilaltepetzi comes from the Altepetl. And also the Nahua people of today, as in my case, I learned in my childhood, I learned how to work in the mila, that is the cornfield. And also the majority of people consume what is produced by the mila, right? The mila is basically the cornfield, and in that place, we receive our first lessons how to work in the land. Nahua people speak in Mexico Nahuatl. That is the concept of our language, Nahuatl. In other regions appears the concept Mexcatlatoli, that is also Nahuatl, and also in other regions, like in the Occident, like in the Pacific, like in Nayarit, Mexico, they say we speak Mexicanero, right? So appears several concepts how to identify the language that we speak, right? So I think that's why if you speak Nahuatl, if you speak Mexcatlatoli, or if you speak Mexicanero, we are Mexicanos, right? So Spanish is known as Castellan-Tlahtoli, right? Like the word of the language from Castilla. Well, the current struggles, I want to mention part of my thought and something that I have seen in my experience as a Nahua speaker. Nahua people have struggled against the mestizo thought. I want to mention two examples. In the region where I was born, the elementary schools want to vanish our Nahua thought and identity, right? And now our language is considered as a LCTL, right? That is a less commonly taught language, right? So that is like a trait of my mother tongue, right? And but in our but at home, our parents, they continue transmitting to the children our mother tongue, right? Also, the Christianism wants to eradicate the Nahua beliefs that are a big component, a strong component of our culture, right? And in our community, Nahua people continue developing our beliefs, right? So, as an answer to these struggles, Nahua people confront the post-colonial forces that want to exterminate the legacy of our ancestors, right? So, when I began with my studies and I began to think in this situation, I said to me, Ave, you need to continue your studies. You need to mention what is happening in your culture, in your the situation with your mother tongue. So uh, like my answer to this situation, I began my work a couple years ago, I think around 2007 in Zacatecas, Mexico. Until now, I have wrote as a co-author some contributions using mainly or thinking mainly in my mother culture. When I visit my small town, I go to the bachilleratos, I go to the high schools, and I encourage to young people to continue speaking our mother tongue. And also, I write my dissertation about how our people of today negotiate and protect their religion and thought using the discourse analysis. I was accepted in 2017 in the State University of New York to develop my studies, and now I am in the process of finishing. Also, I teach Nahuatl in the USA Academy and part of Mexico, right? And when I am teaching Nahuatl, I invite to my students and to my colleagues to help, right, our situations, right, to take care of our Nahuatl language. So in order to finish my participation, I want to mention some words that we are using in English that comes from Nahuatl. We have some words like tomatl, we have chocolatl, we have aguacatl, we have the word coyotl, we have chili, we have shahkal, and we have chilpocli. These words are from Nahuatl, and to me it was interesting to know when I began my studies in English, right, how we are using these words. And I said, these words are not from Spanish, are from Nahuatl, right? So I think that is part of my contribution to this conversation. To me, it's a pleasure to speak about the language that I learned in my childhood, to talk a little bit about people who speak Nahuatl, right? To talk about part of my family or the members of my community, and a little bit as a contribution, my current work. Well, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Ave, for your presentation. Really interesting to listen to both of those presentations and get some insights, both linguistically as well as culture, and to get your firsthand perspective, Ave. So we do have a few questions that have come in the different chats. If you do have any questions, if you could please go ahead and put those in the chat now. Again, you can put those questions in either English or Spanish, and we'll go ahead and start out with a few of those questions. So first we have one question coming in from Carolina. So she says, if languages are tied to cultures, as they help us express ourselves, understand the world around us, have either of you, our presenters, noticed more cultural traits in common going back to the Proto-Uto-Aztecan language or time with the Utes and Nahuatls?
Do you want me to?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I'm not sure that you can make a lot of inferences about commonalities in culture. I mean, the Uto-Aztecan languages were spoken by hunter-gatherers, very small scale societies, hunter-gatherers, as well as being the lingua franca for an immense empire. So culturally, I'm not sure that there are going to be a lot of similarities just because they're Uto-Aztecan. I think the cultural similarities will come with the people they, were neighbors to, rather than the people who spoke languages related to theirs. if that makes sense. Is that?
Yes, thank you. Carolina, if you have any follow-up questions, you're welcome to make those, but I think that does make sense. Abelardo, do you have anything that you would like to add to that question?
I think not until now.
No problem. Okay, so moving on to some of our other questions. So one person asks, in your professional opinion, why has Nahuatl persisted as a language with so many speakers compared to other Uto-Aztecan languages? Dirk, do you want to go ahead and answer first, and then Abe, you can add on?
Okay, but it'll be fairly uninformed. I really don't know much about the history, but I can guess that since it was the lingua franca for the Aztec Empire, that it would have been spoken widely by many different people whose native languages may not have been Nahuatl. And so that usage persisted through the decades and centuries, much as Latin persisted in early medieval Europe, even among people who didn't originally speak Latin. That would be my guess. I'm sure Abelardo has a more informed opinion about that.
Well, I think until today is a good question. I was born in a small town, Professor Elsinga, and in several places are very isolated of the big countries. In that places is like a good place to continue speaking the mother tongue, right? And at the same time Spanish. And to me was like a surprise when I began my studies with Nahuatl, because I know that in several places of Mexico there are many speakers, until in El Salvador, right? Because they speak Nahuatl Pipil. Mm-hmm. And now we have much more contact, right? I don't know, maybe you would like to say that the Nahuatl is like a strong language until now, right? Like Maya or other places, right? But it is true in other places, like the lengua huichol, the lengua cora, right? There are less speakers in comparison with Nahuatl.
And I think what you said about being born in a remote place is right on the money. So I work with the Utes at Ute Mount, of the Ute Mountain Reservation. This is in southwestern Colorado, and there is nothing there. It is, and I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean it is a very remote location. I mean, they have everything they need to live and to live comfortably, but because it's so far away from everybody else, they have been able to kind of keep themselves sort of removed from, the overwhelming influence of the Anglos in the area. I mean, yes, there is going to be there's going to be influence, but I routinely work with people there whose first language is Ute and who feel uncomfortable speaking English. And that's in the United States, where we think that doesn't happen anymore. And it does happen. And I think exactly what you're saying, it being a small remote place, I think contributes to that.
Thank you. So moving on to our next question. So Piali Abelardo, Tlaxcamati, for your presentation. You mentioned that the word for a non-indigenous person in Nahuatl is coyotum. Sorry if I'm pronouncing all of these wrong. Does this have any relationship to coyotum meaning coyote?
I think so. I think so, Benjamin. So we name to a non-indigenous person as coyote, right? I think in the colonial times was a word that was like something offensive, right? Because like Spaniards name to indigenous to who is not who is not a white person, who is not a Spaniard, right? And probably in other cultures, they use other kind of like animals, like to say or to demonstrate, to identify who is non-indigenous person. In I think in our community, the figure of the coyote, it has like is not a what is the word, best word in English? Is little bit rejected this animal, because is an animal who always is looking for the chickens, right? Because we are farmers in our small town, and we produce chickens, and the coyote always is looking for the chickens. And when one person lose a chicken, he or she can offend the, oh, coyote, like you are bad, right? But I think that this concept was like a concept produced in the colonial times, right? Probably as an answer. Okay, if you name, I am indigenous, and I have my name, and I have the name of my culture. I am Maya, or I am Nahuatl, and I speak Maya, and I speak Nahuatl. I am not indigenous. I think several cultures use a word to identify the others. That's it.
I think that's really interesting. Yeah, kind of interesting to think about that connection, and just kind of the imagery too of how it relates to what's going on, in the community, as farmers. So next we have a question for Dr. Alzinga. You mentioned the myth of Aztlan. How does this linguistic family reinforce the myth and its location in the area?
I have to confess, I don't know a lot about the story of Aztlan. I do know, though, that this was an important part of the identity of many Nahuatl people. This idea of a migration, that they were, I don't know if they were expelled or if they left voluntarily, but this idea of a migration, we see this, as I said, the Hopis have a similar sort of story, a migration story. The fact that the usual identification of Aztlan as a place in the north and west of where Nahuatl is currently spoken, it's more suggestive than I think it is kind of proven. After all, it may just be a story. There are many peoples around the world who have stories about migration, so it isn't unique to Uto-Aztecan. But the fact that they have this migration story, and it seems to fit roughly the area where they say they came from, this proto-Uto-Aztecan homeland, seems to me to be an interesting coincidence. The fact that the Hopis have a similar story of migration makes me think that, for a cultural anthropologist, historian, this might be something worth looking into. As a linguist, I'm not sure that I have an informed opinion to make about it, but it's I find this kind of speculation very interesting.
Thank you. And maybe Ave, could you talk a little bit about how the myth of Aztlan has been a part of kind of your experience in Nahuatl culture?
Yeah, I think just a little bit, Carrie. I think as a Nahuatl person, I have listed the myth of Aztlan. I think thinking in this concept, I think what I have listed it by in our community, like like the first people who arrived in Mexico, or they found the like the place that was named Aztlan, right? Like, I don't know, maybe to say that was the Mexico Tenochtitlan, right? I think, Carrie, I'm not so sure in this part, but what I have listened is that our parents, or in our community, like the Aztlan was like before was Mexico Tenochtitlan, right? But I have listened several answers that maybe not was there, right? Maybe is what was in other place, right? We do not know exactly, right? I think just that is my apportation.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, so next question. For Ave, what do you, well, I'm just going to read it in Spanish, sorry. Para Ave, ¿qué piensa hacer con su investigación después de graduar? ¿Piensa usarla para hacer cambios en el tratamiento de Nahuatl? I can't pronounce it. It's in the chat though, in Mexico.
Yeah, of course, Carrie. About that question, I do not know much about the Ute, right? In terms of linguistics, right? I think we need to have more contact with the Ute language or the speakers, right? And other cultural groups. Yes, I have visited the Shoshone group here. I think in, I don't know which place was, but it's very close to Salt Lake City. I don't know if was in Wyoming, one of my trip. But to me, it's interesting to know that the Nahuatl and the Ute share similarities in terms of the language, the structure, or the words related, right? To me, it's good to know the contributions that was sharing the Professor Elsinga, and in the future, Professor Elsinga, we need to meet in order to talk much more about that.
I would like that.
Great, thank you. Okay, so a couple of different questions kind of right in a row on this. So I think this is directed towards you, Dr. Elzinga. What are some of the factors that contribute to the changes in these languages over time? Are there distinctive changes that have occurred depending on the colonization of these areas? And also, are there more similarities found in these languages where they're spoken and become closer together geographically?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when we look at languages and we notice that there are similarities, there are three reasons why these things might be similar. The first one is just coincidence. Those are kind of fun to talk about, but they don't really help us understand the languages any better. The second reason why languages might be similar is because one language has borrowed from another. So Abelardo gave us a nice list of words that were borrowed into Spanish and then into English from Nahuatl. And I mention this to my students all the time. One of my favorite examples of this is the word we have for guacamole, which is just basically avocado sauce, and it comes straight from Nahuatl. And the students invariably, their minds are blown. It's like, wow, that's really interesting. And and I think it gives them a new appreciation for this kind of cultural contact and the linguistic influences that can have. The third reason that languages might be similar is what I spent most of my talk talking about, is that they come from a common source, and they're similar because of that. So when you see, the family down the street where they've got, 5 little blonde-haired kids, they all look the same because they're all brothers and sisters. They share similarities because they came from the same place. I'm sorry, could you repeat the second part of that question?
Sure. Let me scroll up to it. Sorry.
It was really interesting, and I just started talking and forgot what I was going to.
No, you're fine. So they were asking about the other factors that contribute, which I think you just addressed now for us. They also ask, are there distinctive changes that have occurred depending on the colonization of these areas? And are there more similarities found in these languages as they become closer to one another geographically?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So let me address. So first of all, yeah, the similarities that we find due to colonization will be because they borrow lots of words from English. So in Ute, rather than making up a Ute word for computer, they just say computer. And you do this long enough and often enough, the language itself becomes restricted in domains where it might otherwise be used, and English takes over. And so it's not so much a matter of languages becoming similar due to colonization, but that one language just gets overwhelmed by all of the new ideas, the new terms. Abelardo talked about the effects of Christianity on native populations. When you borrow, a whole religious system, you're going to borrow lots and lots of vocabulary, and pretty soon it becomes difficult to talk about religion in your native language. It becomes difficult to talk about technology and about modern life in your native language because the colonizing language has completely overwhelmed it. As far as similarities among these languages because of geographical proximity, it's a really interesting story. So just over my shoulder, that way, we have a mountain in the Utah Valley called Timpanogos. And it's a Ute word, and the etymology of it is something like rock water running. So it has those elements in it, and it actually refers to the Provo River. But they gave it to the mountain, and those elements that we find in the word Timpanogos are shared between Ute and Shoshone. So you could make the case that the name is actually Shoshone. It's not, because it was the Ute people who were first encountered when they named that mountain. But the languages are just so similar to each other, it's really hard to tell when one has borrowed from the other because they just look so much alike. It's like knowing, is this word Portuguese or is it Spanish? You can sort of tell in most cases, but in some cases it's just really, really hard. And a lot of that is because they've just been living next to each other for so many years.
Thank you. And Abe, I saw you nodding along. Do you have anything that you want to add that? I was thinking specifically, you mentioned that that Spanish is generally taught, and that some of your family members who taught you Nahuatl don't speak Spanish. Do you see any impact or differences in the language between those that you interact with that are adopting some Spanish or being taught it versus some of your relatives or other conocidos, sorry, other friends or family that only speak Nahuatl?
Right. I think it will be different in every small town in Chicontepec. And what I am working as what I'm doing research, I have seen that there are like we need to talk about the age, right? As example, the grandparents, basically they spoke Nahuatl, right? They understand, I think, is Spanish much, but they don't speak Spanish, right? If you say I don't know, like the expression "tengo hambre," they understand what I am saying, but they will say "Kena titlacuase." Let's work. One of the I think one of the reasons that that now the children or about in my generation, right? We went to the school, right, in our small town, arrived the elementary school, and the rule was used to speak Nahuatl, right? After the elementary school, the children were speaking two languages, the Spanish in the school and Nahuatl at home, right? So what I saw, one person was speaking like bilingual, bilingual, right? And sometimes he preferred to speak more Spanish or to combine the two languages, right? Also, other children, they prefer used to speak Nahuatl, but when we have a new I don't know, like a machine or a new word in Spanish, in that case, it's difficult how to say in Nahuatl. We have the word computadora, we have the word teléfono, right? In that case, it's much more difficult to use our mother tongue, and the children who learn Spanish, they use let's use teléfono, right? So and the elderly people, they understand what is teléfono, right? So but what I have seen is that until now, many people, elderly people, and our parents, they they prefer to speak Nahuatl with us at home, right? So to me, it was a surprise how our Nahuatl, how our mother tongue have survived after the conquest, after the independence, Mexico, and until now, right? Yeah. So I think the issue, Kari and Professor Elsinga, the current issue of today is the emigration from rural places to city places. That is a strong issue, because in that case, people who we are living in the cities, it's difficult to like retain to the children his Nahuatl, right? Anyway.
Great, thank you for that. That connects with another question that we have as well. So one person asks, Abelardo, why do you think Nahuatl is threatened now in your community and in the past? But despite that, the language has continued to be spoken.
Well, that is a very good question, right? And I think we have multiple answers, right? And until now, I am using the concept agency, right? This agency is like we are thinking, or always we are thinking, to protect, to take care of our language, Kari. And in our small town, we have TV, so programs TV that are in Spanish. We have the radio in Spanish, and not much in our mother tongue. To me, now people in Chicontepec, in my municipality, or in other places are very intelligent, and they are, or we are, protecting our language strategically, right, with strategies, right? So to me, it was a surprise how until now we are using the Nahuatl, right? And in my municipality now, the Spanish is much more strong, right? So my contribution, or the contribution of my Nahuatl colleagues, it's important to continue building, to continue developing our culture, right? To me, Kari, we need to say thanks to Nahuatl people or to other people, because they decide to continue using our Nahuatl. I need to say thanks to my parents. I need to say thanks to my grandparents, because they did not abandon never their language, right? So that's it, Kari.
Thank you. And I also want to get your perspective on this, Dr. Elzinga, as well. I know you mentioned some of those same things that Abelardo said to the last couple questions of kind of adopting new words that, for new technologies that didn't exist, when the language first happened, as well as this idea of, why are some of these languages surviving? And maybe you could speak specifically to what you've observed in your work with the Ute community.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Abelardo, for that. But I was actually quite moved to hear you talk about your parents and thanking your parents for helping preserve the language. I, of course, am not a heritage speaker or a native speaker of Ute or of Shoshone or Goshute, any of the other languages that I've studied. But I have worked with many of these people who I saw in the chat a question or a comment came up about the boarding schools. It's kind of in the news now because of what they found in that Canadian boarding school. One of my Goshute consultants actually was sent to a boarding school, and I asked her about that, and she said, yeah, we were punished for speaking our native language, and they always housed us with people who did not speak the same way we did so that we would not speak our native language. But she said, but at night I would say my prayers in my language so that I would not lose it. Other people that I've worked with in these communities have told me similar sorts of things, that even in the face of this pressure to abandon their language, and the pressure may have been intentional or unintentional, but they feel it as a very strong pressure, and they resist as much as they can. And I am grateful to them for this resistance, because it helps preserve something that is vital and important to these communities. One of the languages I had the privilege of studying for for a bit was Chemehuevi. There was a man named Johnny Hill Jr., who was the last speaker of Chemehuevi. Excuse me. And I got to know him fairly well during my time in his community. And he just recently passed away. And now that language is gone. There is nobody left who speaks that language. But he told me similar sorts of stories. He said, I didn't have anybody to talk to, so I made videos of me talking because I needed to hear the language, and I wanted to make sure that the language was there, that it was being spoken where we have lived. And so these sorts of resistance efforts are greatly appreciated by those who work with indigenous communities. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a huge part of that identity, right? And Abe, you touched on that in your presentation as well. So another question that we have is Abe, is your Nawa variant mutually intelligible with other variants? If not, which variants are closest to your variant, and which is the furthest?
Oh, thank you. It's a very good question. Well, when I was in my community, I did not have much contact with other Nawa people. And I think in that time, of course, it was difficult to understand the other variants. And little by little, I began to understand the other dialects, the Nawa dialects. Not much changes in the north of Mexico with the variant of the Nahuatl from Hidalgo, a little bit about Nahuatl from San Luis Potosí, a little bit difficult about Nahuatl from Veracruz Central and South, right? When I began with my Nahuatl studies, to me was also a surprise, because I discovered it like Nahuatl from Guerrero is very much more similar, like with the Nahuatl from the Huasteca. That was a good, a good trait to know that Nahuatl from Guerrero, like we can understand ourselves easily. Then Carrie and Professor Elsinga, according to my studies, I began to understand little by little all the dialects, right? According to my studies, according to consult dictionaries. And I said now that the Nahuatl has intelligibility a lot, right? Between the variants, right? In that case, will depend if you are doing any kind of study, right? And also, Professor Elsinga, because I am now interested in the colonial Nahuatl, right? So I am consulting books, dictionaries, plays, and I have seen that many words that we not use in Huasteca, many of these words are used in several places, right? Like if you study Nahuatl colonial, and if then you study modern Nahuatl, I think you will have a good source to understand the Nahuatl of today, right? So in general, to conclude, Carrie, my answer is that the Nahuatl has intelligibility, right? And now I am in contact with Nahuatl from El Salvador, and I discovered that we have much in common in our Nahuatl, right? That is my answer.
Thank you. And Dr. Elzinga, do you see a similar situation among the different languages that you're studying, and specifically with Ute?
Yeah, so every summer they have what they call a Shoshone family reunion, and they invite all of the Nunavut speaking people who happen to be around. So that's Paiute, Shoshone, Goshute, Ute, Comanche, and they all get together for a long weekend, a week. I'm not sure how long it lasts. I've never gone to one. So even if they can't understand each other completely, they feel a kinship with each other because they do recognize words, they recognize grammatical constructions, and they certainly recognize life ways, cultural habits and practices. And every time I hear about the Shoshone family reunion, my heart just jumps for joy, because they are recognizing that there is going to be strength in unity even when they speak differently from each other, that they should be working together to help preserve traditional language and culture.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that's kind of a broad takeaway that we can have from all of this, is just this connection that we all have to one another, and specifically within these languages, and hopefully, Abe, you can feel some connection to that identity as well. I know you talked about not forgetting, and the importance of language and identity, and I think that's something that can be added to the story as kind of we learn more about these connections. We will go ahead and close at this time. We're so grateful for our wonderful speakers, Dr. Elzinga and Abelardo de Cruz. Thank you for meeting with us and sharing your perspectives and your research with us. Also, thank you to our audience members and all of you who contributed your questions either on Zoom or on YouTube. And a special thank you to the Consulate as well for your support and in helping us put together this great event today. Thank you all so much, and hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Carrie. I was happy to be here and to participate, and it was nice to meet you, Abelardo, and thanks also to the Consulate and to the University of Utah for supporting this.
Thank you for all, and nice to meet you to all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.